Hello to you. For Telesur, I'm Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. Our top story today takes us to Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro has called for a new border of peace with Colombia and again invited his Colombian counterpart, Juan Manuel Santos, to meet for talks to resolve the crisis. Maduro said he and his government were implementing new measures to guarantee safety and stability along the border. He accused the Colombian authorities of failing to meet Venezuelan requests to curb violence committed by Colombian paramilitary groups. His speech comes a day after two Colombian paramilitaries were killed in an incident with Venezuelan security forces inside the border.
Our objective is to construct a new border, a border of peace, of work and prosperity, of respect to the rule of law. These have been the objectives behind the closure of borders, and you can now see the beneficial results. We have activated measures where there were clashes with Venezuelan forces, and the criminals will then flee to Colombian territory. Colombian authorities say nothing about this. No country will allow for attacks and homicides, as the Colombian paramilitaries have been doing in Venezuela.
Meanwhile, the foreign minister of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, has traveled to New York, where she will meet with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to explain the border situation. She will tell Ban that her government closed border crossings to put a stop to contraband and other crimes committed inside Venezuela by Colombian paramilitaries, who then hide out across the border in Colombia, where they enjoy impunity. Now we go live to Bogota, where our correspondent Natalia Margarita is there. Natalia, can you hear us? It's great to touch base with you. Hello, Natalia? Natalia, can you hear me?
Hello? Yeah, I can hear you now, Regan.
It's great to touch base with you. Well, so President Santos used some very strong language yesterday. He, well, not only criticizing Venezuela, but its political system. What kinds of reactions have you been getting there on the ground in Colombia?
Yeah, in fact, President Juan Manuel Santos, not just yesterday, but just a couple of minutes ago, referred again to the big difference between the economic models of both countries. And it was within this context that he referred to Bolivarian revolution as a system that, according to him, is self-destroying. He also said that he don't believe that the Bolivarian revolution is working out. And in the wake of these remarks by President Santos, basically what social leaders and analysts here in Colombia has been saying is that it is very important to insist in respectful dialogue, which means to not interfere in other countries' internal affairs, as it was the case of the reference that Juan Manuel Santos did to Venezuela economic model. There also have been voices saying that President Juan Manuel Santos should, when it comes to economic model, he should start tackling finally some issues in Colombia. For instance, let's remember that in the latest agrarian census here in Colombia and the results that were released just less than a month ago, it was exposed how the rural areas in Colombia are living under extreme poverty. For around 40% of Colombian campesinos are living under poverty. Also, the issue of human rights here in Colombia. Yesterday, in the wake of the national commemoration of human rights, we got to know some alarming numbers, such as that in the first half of 2015, some 69 human rights defenders and social leaders have been assassinated. So in the wake of this, these references that Juan Manuel Santos have been doing regarding the neighbor country, the social leaders and activists here in Colombia have been calling the government to tackle our internal affairs rather than criticizing other countries' internal affairs.
Understood. Well, yesterday the Colombian foreign minister was at the UN in New York. Today it's the turn of the Venezuelan foreign minister to chat with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Do you get a sense there that the United Nations can play a positive role in the border crisis?
Well, Well, we need to wait. In fact, this meeting happened. Our foreign minister, Maria Angela Holguin, held this meeting with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Now we still need to wait what the results of the meeting between Foreign Affairs Minister of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, and Ban Ki-moon, what results we will have on that before knowing whether, which is going to be exactly the role that the UN it's going to play here. But something important to highlight is that the UN already called and insist again in bilateral dialogue and respectful dialogue between both countries as the only way out of this border crisis. The representative of the United Nations Development Program for Latin America and the Caribbean said that the UN has expressed its concern regarding the humanitarian crisis, but I insist that the UN is calling rather for a bilateral and respectful dialogue. There is also lots of expectations here regarding whether a meeting directly between both presidents, President Juan Manuel Santos and President Nicolas Maduro, is finally gonna take place or not. But this is basically what people have been insisting here, that it's time that both presidents sit face to face and discuss these issues that at the end develop in this border crisis.
Natalia, back at the border, we were hearing word that towns and villages close to the border were really benefiting from the paramilitary activity. What's happening with those towns right now?
Can you repeat again, Regan? I'm not listening to you very well.
The towns and villages close to the Colombia-Venezuela border that were previously benefiting from the paramilitary activity, from the smuggling basically, were previously benefiting. Now they aren't. What's going on in those towns and villages, you think?
Well, I mean, people here, the government itself, the Colombian government itself has acknowledged that there is a problem of paramilitarism operating in the border, that the smuggling, in fact, it's a problem that no one can deny. But I insist in the thing of bilateral dialogue. Also, President Santos said that while acknowledging that these problems are real, that are a fact that is happening here in the border, but that this should be tackled together. Also, social leaders here has been saying that, for instance, the issue of smuggling is an issue of co-responsibility, and that's what they are calling for both presidents to meet. Now, in terms of paramilitarism, it's also well known here that Colombian paramilitaries not just have been operating in this side of the border, meaning the Colombian side of the border, but that in a way, and that's the term that many social leaders use here, that Colombia has been exporting paramilitarism, and not just to Venezuela, Regan, but also to other neighboring countries, as is the case of Ecuador. It's definitely an issue that Colombia has to tackle, and especially in the wake of a peace process as we're facing right now.
So much happening, Natalia. We're glad you're there, by the way, and we know that you'll continue covering this. Thanks for the great reporting.
Back to you, Regan.
Argentina's foreign and finance ministers are also visiting the UN in New York. They're presenting the General Assembly with Buenos Aires' proposals for managing the restructuring of sovereign debt. The draft resolution aims to protect countries that restructure their debt from attacks by so-called vulture funds, like the one on Argentina last year, which is still in the courts. The resolution is intended as a first step towards international legislation that would prevent such abuse. So how would these proposals work exactly? Well, we've got correspondent Telesur's Leo Probletti Coduti in Buenos Aires now on the line. Leo, are you there?
Reagan, lovely to talk to you, and it's a very important day today here for Argentina and the economy and the pledge against the vulture fund holdouts, because the United Nations General Assembly will today vote on a new legal debt framework for sovereign debt restructuring an initiative that was sparked by Argentina's debt battle with its holdout creditors and presented last year by Bolivia on behalf of a group of 77 developing nations in China. Now, a large number of positive votes are expected for the initiative today at the General Assembly, where the Economy Minister, the Argentine Economy Minister, Axel Kicillof, and Foreign Minister Hector Timerman are expected to be present. The framework includes 9 key principles to avoid actions of the vulture fund, and all eyes will be on what decision the United States and European countries take on the vote after largely rejecting it or abstaining last year. Now, just very quickly, the few countries that voted against the initiative last year represent 7% of all the countries that participate in the General Assembly, and those countries were the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, Australia and Germany, and although a few countries voted against it, 41 chose to abstain, including most European states, when this initiative was voted late last year at the General Assembly. Regan.
Tell us a bit more about what the proposals are and how they're expected to benefit and how they're expected to work out.
Look, the outcome is expected to be a very good one here in Argentina. Most specialists in the matter are expecting a very positive result at the UN General Assembly in New York this afternoon. Argentina's ambassador at the UN, Maria Cristina Perceval, said yesterday that it will have a political impact, a huge political impact if voted. She said, quote, "The sovereign immunity of states will be hard to ignore after today's vote," unquote. Now, among the principles agreed to in July, when this, what happened in July, and we reported about this on Telesur, was that the ad hoc committee on sovereign debt restructuring gathered and put together 9 principles back in July that will be voted today. And among those principles was the right of states before foreign domestic courts and exceptions, that they should be restrictively. Argentina has long argued that stance during its legal battle with holdout creditors, and at the same time, the committee said sovereign countries also have the right to design their own macroeconomic policy, including restructuring its sovereign debt. Reagan.
I've got a lot more questions for you, Leo, but we've got to cut it for now. Hopefully we can touch base with you another time. Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Not a problem, a pleasure.
Moving on now, Standard & Poor's has cut Brazil's sovereign credit rating to junk on Wednesday. It's a blow to President Dilma Rousseff since it could frighten off investors just as her government is battling to balance the books. The New York-based credit rating agency cut Brazil's long-term rating from BBB- to BB+, which means its debt is deemed to have significant speculative characteristics. Last month, the Brazilian government presented its first ever deficit government for 2016, and its economy officially went into recession in August. Venezuela's opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez, incarcerated for his alleged involvement in last year's violent demonstrations in Caracas, arrived in court Thursday morning for a last hearing in the trial against him. The Attorney General presented its conclusions last week. It ratified Lopez's charges of public incitement, criminal association, and being responsible for damages and fires. Lopez faced a possible 13-year sentence. The president of Venezuela's National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, has criticized the Inter-American Human Rights Court for ordering the government to reissue a broadcast license to the private TV channel RCTV. The Venezuelan Broadcasting Authority decided not to renew RCTV's license in 2007, accusing it of committing a series of irregularities and of helping to organize a failed coup 5 years earlier.
Gritemos con brío. Organismos internacionales que están solo al servicio de los intereses. Los diputados y diputadas que estén de acuerdo con la propuesta presentada de aprobar el decreto del compañero Nicolás Maduro Moros, donde se declara el estado de excepción de los municipios Mara, Padilla.
Days after a team of independent investigators released a report that put into serious doubt the official investigation into the forced disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students, families of thousands of Mexico's other disappeared are now demanding lawmakers to pass unprecedented legislation that will not only punish perpetrators of the crime, but will ultimately lead to the location of the missing. We've got more from Telesur's Clayton Khan.
They're the families of Mexico's so-called other disappeared, parents, siblings, and spouses of the estimated 27,000 people that have gone missing over the past decade. Here in the country's capital, they hold a forum on preventing the crime and make it clear that the state has failed in prevention and in its investigations.
The state lacks a methodology in investigating cases of disappeared people. And thus, in practice, we, the families of the victims, assume the role of the investigator and prosecutor's office.
The families demand a new law that will penalize forced disappearance and kidnappings, coming days after independent experts presented a damning report on the exemplary case of the 43 disappeared Ayotzinapa students. The report exposes structural failures investigating the crime, yet Mexican officials now seem to agree with their own contradictions.
I am convinced that the report is enormously positive. It seems to me that the report coincides with the official version and investigation in very important questions.
The independent investigators have proposed to Mexico's Senate that structural changes be made in how the authorities carry out impartial investigations. They say that the official investigation in the Ayotzinapa case came to quick conclusions on partial evidence.
What we are proposing is a fundamental change that we think should be adopted immediately. That is that forensic analysts be autonomous from the Attorney General's office.
Meanwhile, representatives of the families of the disappeared 43 students push for lawmakers to guarantee a new and objective investigation in the case, while at the same time investigating a possible cover-up by officials.
That there be the opportunity for the creation of two prosecutors' offices. One could be in charge of the substantive investigation in Ayotzinapa, that will be in charge of finding truth and justice in the case, and the other will be an internal prosecutor's office that will help us to explain what happened with those officials that were in charge of the investigation.
Ultimately, what the families of the 43 disappeared students and the other 27,000 demand are effective legal mechanisms that will lead to truth and justice, and finally the location, dead or alive, of their missing loved ones. Clayton Khan, Telesur, Mexico City.
In the Caribbean, the outgoing Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, has challenged the results of Monday's general election and has asked that it be declared null and void. The former leader is complaining that the electoral authorities unfairly extended voting by 1 hour due to heavy rainfall. The People's National Movement, led by now Prime Minister Keith Rowley, won the election by 23 seats to 18. Trinidad's Elections and Boundaries Commission says its actions were entirely in line with its constitutional powers. The Honduras National Congress will revise the proposed general budget for 2016. Some say that this is an opportunity to change some aspects of it. For example, the concentration in the projects managed directly by the president instead of increasing budgets for things such as health, education, and public investment.
For 2016, Honduras will have a general budget of $7.7 billion. Of this, President Juan Hernandez will have the control of 65%, or approximately $4.6 billion for his programs. There won't be enough money for other programs which are short of funding, such as public health and public education, which are facing a very precarious situation.
There are some lines and priorities that are dictated directly from the president in almost all terms. The question is how much planning really exists, and if the plans that are oriented in terms of being expenses aiming for development, or are they just expenses that come to cover other priorities that are not necessarily of development, but instead are part of a strategy to gain popularity and not to develop the country.
Even though the government is obligated to present the new budget no later than September 15, still very few offices have presented reports on the spending of the last budget.
We are really worried because at this time there are no reports on expenses. Only 13 of 45 public offices have presented their reports on how they used the last budget. We are worried of how 65% of the last budget was used by the executive power. And we see that for this year, President Juan Hernandez is attempting to take even more control of funds and use it for his presidential programs.
The budget has to be approved before December 31st this year, and the political opposition is attempting to unify and try to reorient the budget toward the programs that currently are in crisis, instead of using that money for the president's political agenda that points to hold on to power illegally without any democratic consultation, using militarization and political activism based on support programs. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
The first settlement of Europeans in the southern cone was in Uruguay. Now archaeologists have found some traces there of those settlements dating back to 1527 in the San Salvador River. The first city established by the Spaniards on the South American mainland was Cumana in Venezuela, and then Colombia's Santa Marta, both on the Caribbean coast. This discovery shows that the next step was Uruguay, where they started the conquest of Rio de la Plata. According to the experts, they came with a priest, a court clerk, and had records, so we can talk about the proper conquest and not just exploration. On Tuesday, the UN's refugee agency warned that at least 42,000 refugees were expected in Hungary this week alone. Many migrants are rushing to enter Hungary before tough new laws come into force on September 15th that are set to outlaw crossing the border. In late August, a 110-mile razor wire barrier was erected along its border with Serbia, but has not proven to be much of a hindrance. However, Hungary is also building a fence and wants to start deploying its army. While most of the focus on the world's lens has been on Syrian refugees, there are also a growing number of Palestinian refugees in Syria and Lebanon who have been forced to uproot for a second time. Many have joined the hundreds of thousands of Syrians fleeing war on a perilous journey hoping to reach mainland Europe, but making it only as far as Cyprus. Palestinians who have fled Syria to Lebanon say life in the camps is increasingly overcrowded and unbearable. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who has been confined in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for almost 3 years now, discussed his recently released book, The WikiLeaks Files, with media house RT. He said Washington planned to topple the democratically elected government of Syria long before the civil war began in 2011. He also spoke of the U.S. empire and its global military presence with more than 1,400 bases in over 120 countries.
Paranoia within
Saudi-led military alliance warplanes bombed targets throughout Yemen's capital, Sana'a, in what witnesses described as the fiercest series of attacks on the city in over 5 months of war. The raids hit houses of political leaders in the Iran-allied Houthi movement and military bases, leaving the city's 2 million residents shell-shocked. Reports say that 8 Yemeni civilians were killed, including several beekeepers. The coalition has stepped up its airstrikes on the capital and increased its deployment of troops. In the U.S. city of Baltimore, officials approved a $6.4 million settlement to the family of Freddie Gray, the unarmed black man whose death from a spinal injury while in police custody triggered nationwide protests. The unanimous vote by the Board of Estimates comes ahead of a hearing in the following hours on moving from the city the trials of 6 police officers charged in Gray's death. Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake said the payment would save the city money and the family years of litigation. Voting for the next leader of the British Labour Party has now closed, with the clear favourite being the left-winger Jeremy Corbyn. According to the most recent opinion polls, Corbyn was set to capture 53% of the votes. He has become the darling of both youthful and elderly Labour supporters, as well as the trade unions, who are all tired of the neoliberal policies of senior Labour figures like former Prime Minister Tony Blair.
Medical Association has warned about this.
No one has yet been reported as hurt, but many homes and cars were destroyed after the Japanese city of Joso was flooded out. The flood was caused by the Kunigawa River, the banks of which burst after Typhoon Etao hit landfall. The floods also raised additional concerns over the spread of contaminated water as the Fukushima nuclear plant's drainage pumps were overwhelmed, reportedly sending radiation-tainted water into the ocean. Japanese authorities said they were still on high alert as several people are still missing. Hundreds of immigrants and refugees protested at the Budapest train station in rejection of the closing of stations by police. More on this next.
The desperate reactions are evidence that the proposal made by members of the European Union about the asylum quotas keep losing strength. While the station in Budapest was closed on Monday morning, hundreds of refugees and immigrants that were in temporary shelters protested in rejection to the rules imposed by the Hungarian government, supported by the police authorities.
Yesterday, Mrs. Merkel said we had to register here in Hungary to be able to cross towards the German border. But Austria is saying no. The Syrian people are not allowed to cross. What do we have to do? Every country has different situations. We don't know what we have to do.
The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, confirmed that the refugees would be distributed between the Union countries, taking into account the capacity of the shelters, although Germany has started to receive asylum applications from Syrians that run from conflict in their country. Hassan assures that the instability and bad conditions have barred them from reaching their destination.
I've been here for 4 days, and everything we are living here is a very bad situation, because we are trapped here, and we are waiting for a quick solution from Europe that will help people to reach their destiny.
With cries of freedom, the protesters at the train station made it clear that the measures implemented by the Hungarian government seek to generate fear and justify the intervention of the army in the border. Due to this situation, an extraordinary reunion will be held in the Hungarian parliament to define the possible border control that look to accelerate the withholding of immigrants. The crisis that the European bloc faces regarding the refugee crisis is due to the unfulfilled promises presented at the beginning of the year.
Amsterdam will host the 13th edition of the Homeless World Cup from September 12th. Players from 49 nations are set to travel there for the tournament. The sporting event started in 2003 and has been steadily growing ever since. The idea behind the contest is to use soccer to inspire homeless people to change their lives, with the hope that they can improve social relations and develop a sense of empowerment. And finally this afternoon, a new human species has been found in South Africa. This new species has been named Homo naledi, and scientists have hailed the discovery as a breakthrough in evolution research. The fossilized bones of 15 bodies from an ancient species related to humans were discovered in a cave, a fact that has led paleoanthropologists to believe that this Homo naledi also appeared to bury their dead, which is a trait previously believed to be uniquely human. For more on these and other stories, please visit our website, telesurutv.net/English. We end today with a wireless-controlled light installation at Rome's ancient chariot track at Circus Maximus, made up of a group of French artists with 256 spheres of light. From our news teams in Quito, Ecuador, and here in Caracas, Venezuela, for Telesur English, I'm Regan Devines. We'll have another news brief for you this evening.